I didn't think they were going to get this pissed off.
Just shut up and keep driving!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Inforunners Podcast. And today we're going to be discussing what is better for your casual player, a specialist ship or a generalist ship. I'm Dasein was here.
And this is Hayes, along with our specialist guest.
Hello, my name is Snake.
And we're going to be discussing the idea that all ships should be specialist ships instead of trying to be a generalist jack of all trades. Specialist ships have the ability to earn more money and are the best route, whilst generalist ships are pale shadows of their counterparts. They lack the earning potential that the specialist ships are very focused on. If you compare like the 315p exploration model versus the Reliant Sen not only can do that exploration, but can do then the science and the research on top of that in order to earn that extra money. Or if you compared like the Freelancer Dur or the Hornet Tracker versus the Terrapin for scanning, the Terrapin's got them outclassed like several times over. There's really no comparison there between the two. And then if you were to take the Hull B versus anything sub $90, well, there's nothing that can compete with the Hull B with the pure cargo. Even if you need some sort of an escort and you have to pay for people to come escort you, the sheer amount of cargo it brings to the table makes it the better option. It's going to be bringing in more money hand over fist than any other ship in its class.
That definitely helps with the point about the Starfarer and the Starfarer Gemini, because the difference, with the Gemini, you get, more armor and more armament, but obviously you sacrifice the key point of a Starfarer, and that's to, do area fueling, carry fuel, and maybe some cargo. So obviously, if you want to take a Starfarer into battle or just somewhere, you're not just going to leave it alone. You're going to at least, pay that extra difference for, fighter escort or even something with it. So why lose that fuel capacity that's useful for your fleet?
This is one of the key reasons why people complain about smaller ships lacking and not having their place versus the larger counterparts. If you look at the larger industry ships, these guys in the around 350 range, 3 to 350, start having pure specialized roles. You have things like the Orion, the Reclaimer, the Crucible, and then the whole series, the larger ones, the Carrack, all of those things are pure special ships that do their role, and they're the best at their role. Then when you start looking at the mid to low price vessels, as soon as you start getting into those range, you really start lacking in pure specialists, especially at the low end. You have ships like the Herald, or you got the Reliant Scent, that do their jobs really, really well. But then you have all these ships that are trying to do too much, like the 300 series. It's really trying to do too much, and it's even gimped more by the fact that they gimp the hard points on all but the military version of that. So you have all of these ships that would be actually viable competitors to the larger ones in their own way, like the Prospector being able to go on planets to do mining, unlike the Orion. But being as they're all trying to do too much, they are lacking at doing one thing well.
Well, there's another point with the large specialist ships. Just because they specialize doesn't mean they're actually bad at being generalists outside of their role. The Reclaimer has decent firepower along with cargo capacity to expand out into other roles. The Hull series can be used as refuelers and may not be their primary services, but they can expand into different things. A Carrack is like a jack of all trades outside of exploration and science. These ships are capable of doing those single roles better than anyone else, but can still expand out into other people's roles reasonably well. This is something that all smaller and medium-sized ships, for the most part, lack, with the exception of a select few.
And the sad thing is, this is carried on not just in industry ships, but into your military vessels. We have tons of superiority fighters, some better than others, mind you, and a lot of dropships, but we're lacking in the support crafts. Like, we're lacking bombers, electronic warfare, schwacks, scouts, medium-sized military vessels. And we're not talking about, like, Polaris size. We're talking about like Constellation to Cutlass size vessels that perform different roles. We're lacking
There's a severe lack of medium-sized military ships in general. I mean, the only ships really are the Vanguard, the Redeemer, and then you get into the Retaliator. And it's even jumping from a Vanguard Harbinger to a Retaliator, the loadout in torpedoes that the Harbinger brings to the table is only like a sixth of the total loadout in torpedoes that a Retaliator can bring. There needs to be some sort of progression that moves up the chain to sort of cover this gaping gap.
Yeah, you can definitely use an example of that, meaning like the price differences between, a Harbinger and a Retaliator, because a Retaliator is, barely maybe $25 more. And it has like that specified role being a heavy, torpedo bomber. It does that so much better. And mind you, what I always think about is, yes, we know for a fact they're going to create a system supporting, player customization. They want their ship to, like, they want an Aurora to be more of a racer. They're going to put more engines, obviously, like sacrificing some other component. But a ship that's dedicated and made specifically for one thing without players customizing it is going to perform and outperform way better than a ship that players are going to try to find a formula for to make it into a dedicated something, which they just need to focus more on these specialized. Like, it's good to have these generalized roles. It gives people options, but that's more for like if you're just starting out. You know what I mean? Like, in reality, no person, in my opinion, should start out with like, an Merchantman or an Orion, like, unless they know what they're doing. But then that's a different category on its own. That's how I feel about that.
There's also the other fact that if you're starting out with ships, and then because you've classified these as starting ships, which then cannot be specialized later. I mean, if you did it the other way and you started with specialized ships that could also branch out and do things multi-role, maybe not as well as their main primary focus, their select specialist role, then these ships would have a prolonged life into the future endgame content. It wouldn't matter if it was a small or medium ship, because it's now a specialized ship. It will forever have a dedicated use and continue to be useful past the point where people move on to bigger and better ships.
Goes back to what we were talking about last episode, where the big issue of starter ships being your throwaway vessels is they aren't specialized. What CIG really needs to do is to start specializing a lot of these vessels, and to really start saying, when they go through these reworks or these passes, what do we want it to do? And let's make it good at that role. Instead of saying, well, let's make it just good at everything, and really not good at everything. And the other thing they need to kind of walk away from is, as Snake was saying, the modularity in some ways. Because let's take the Vanguard series. Every single one of the Vanguard series excels at something, except for the Warden. Seriously. Every one of those has a purpose, but when you get to the Warden, it's too heavy to be a really good fighter, but it's not. It's in that weird limbo area.
Yeah, on that subject, I mean, the Vanguard Warden, basically, it's a strong, long-range fighter. It does what it can do, but compared to what you'd even think, because no one thinks of it as a generalized ship. Like, it has a description. Even the Constellation Andromeda, it's generalized, like multi-purpose, that's literally in the almost in the name. But you got a Vanguard Warden and it says long-range fighter, so its main goal is to be, have that power capability and everything. But right now, because there's not a lot of information out there in the game, the only way we mainly can compare like the strength of things is sometimes even the price range, and that's usually in the skill and the size. So with a price range now of $250 US dollars, it should not only have a lot more armor, it should be damn good, a very strong adversary to go against. But right now it still feels that it might be lacking in some areas. It's too generalistic. Yes, it was a long range fighter, that means you have to have longer range, sensor range and all that, but like firepower, maybe something specific that puts it out like, that's definitely a more powerful fighter I'd like to get into. Because again, that range, there's a lot of other ships that are way more specialized in what they're made to do compared to that ship. You know what I mean? Especially with 250, that's a lot of money. So when you pay for that, that's almost like endgame for a single person. So I feel like, yeah, they probably should work on that a lot more.
Personally, I think the Vanguard series is only really getting into its own when you start going to the specialist variants like the Harbinger and the Sentinel. When they bring those specialist roles, suddenly the larger ship design, these roles that don't fit into smaller fighters, brings something to the table which nothing else does, and suddenly starts justifying having this huge ship. As opposed to a Warden where, well, they put a bed and an ejection sheet and like a table in to this huge, most of the ship is completely used with stuff that's not relevant to its main primary role other than, well, like camping out.
And this also kind of passes on to other ships like your Caterpillar and Constellation. Yes, the modules for the Caterpillar aren't out yet. But think of it this way. You have a ship that has, right now, okay cargo capacity. Not as good as any of the Hull series around that same range. But then you also have, well, if you start throwing in different pieces into it, you're going to be getting a ship that is a jack of all trades, but still probably is going to end up being meh in the long run.
It's going to be half decent at everything, but a master of none. So, like, if you're trying to compete against any other specialist ship in the same area, it's probably going to do okay, but it's not going to be nearly as competitive. I think it's good for those sort of people who just want to stick to one ship but want to try a bit of everything. But I think in the long run, if you do find your niche where you really want to sort of excel at, the Caterpillar is not one of those ships as your first choice.
Well,
yeah, I definitely agree. Another thing I have to think about is, to me, generalized ships kind of kill the org or the group, playing as a group game, because you have a specialized ship that seems more like that's for, the guy who's solo or maybe in like a group of 4 or 5, because they can generally handle everything they need to survive or stick around on their own. Whereas, obviously, you'll get a lot more essentiality and support from a larger org group. Like, not, it doesn't have to be a lot, maybe even 20 people or something, but have specialized ships. So each one is an expert and a master at what, they're specialized in doing. So you not only do you have one ship that can do generally everything. So you have, like, imagine like a blanket, and it's a light, you can definitely see through it, a gray blanket around the general area. So obviously you're covering everything, but with what, a thin sheet. Whereas you got these specialized, covering the same areas, but multiple people, you got, thick, you got everything covered to the max and, ready for whatever happens and whatever's going to hit you. Same thing with, the Connie, honestly, that's how I feel about it. Because it's just how I feel. Like, yes, when you talk for the Connie, you think of the mainly everything's focused on the Andromeda. Yes, the Constellation has different variants like the Aquila, the Phoenix and the Taurus, but still it's almost like they're just being lazy and using the same sheet to give it a little bit extra oomph, in one area, when they should just, go at it, full blast.
What they are missing most from the lineup in the 60-meter ship category is industry-specific ships. They need industry-specific ships that are dedicated to a role and focus almost solely on it. They have it in the smaller range to a limited extent. In the larger capital class ships, that's all there is. But in the 60-meter thing, there's no 60-meter salvage ship. There's no 60-meter mining ship. There's no 60-meter pure military ship. They have all these gaps in capacity, which, in some reason, they only want to build these multi-crew jack-of-all-trade ships, like the Constellation. Like the 600 series is coming up pretty soon from Origin, and from what I can tell, they want to do a direct competitor to the Constellation, which means this is going to be another multi-crew, jack-of-all-trades, master-of-none ship, when what they bleedingly need most is these specialist ships in the medium size range.
Well, guys, what do you think? Are we completely off here? Should they, CIG, rethink what they're doing and maybe go back and do some passes on some of their other ships to make them more specialized and able to compete against even the larger ships in certain niche areas? Or, well, should we have those general ships for people that just want to do everything? What do you think?
And don't forget to put any comments down in the box below. And don't forget to like and subscribe.
And as always,
catch you around in the verse.